Thank you so much for the opportunity to go now into the business of the conversation by actually having our first panel, which I am honored to invite to the stage. So I hope they are all here. We have Gibril Faal, Professor Faal. Give him a hand of applause. Professor Faal has been mentioned a few times, I think, in the course of the conversation already. Appreciating your innovation. In 2003, he founded Remit Aid as a way to be transmitting successfully and sustainably remittances into the continent for sustainable development. In 2014, he was honored with an OBE on the Queen's birthday list for his services to international development and philanthropy. He's a visiting professor at the London School of Economics. He is also leading GK Partners as a firm that provides a lot of services that are relevant for us. And he's many other things that I won't go into. But welcome, Gibril. Then I would also want to welcome Esme Stout. Give a hand of applause. So Esme is one of the leading lights in analysis around philanthropy engagement with the OECD Development Center. Yeah. And in that, part of what Esme does is engage with conversations and bridging conversations of domestic foundations and cross-border foundations. She has also previously been an advisor to the Deputy Secretary General in the OECD. She has also been, she prefers to say junior analyst, but I think that's unfair to her work. She has been an analyst in the private financing for sustainable development team within OECD. And part of what she has also been doing is making the links between sustainable development and OECD expertise. So welcome, Esme. And then Chenai, where are you? I would like to welcome Chenai to the stage. So Chenai is well known to many of you as Executive Director of the Tax Network. Yes, please sit. The Tax Justice Network Africa, based in Nairobi. And Chenai Mukumba has actually coordinated a lot of work that is happening on the continent with many civil society organizations on tax justice, fighting illicit financial flows, working for progressive taxation on the continent, and ensuring that money that's flowing in the continent is protected and there are no leakages in the system from public finances, and coordinating a whole network of organizations that are engaged in these issues. One of the things that I've admired most about Chenai is that I like people who are prepared for the work that they do. And Chenai not only holds a master's from Wits University in International Relations, but also invested in a master's in taxation from Oxford University and working on tax justice issues. So welcome, Chenai. So I would like to start you off actually by a question that maybe all of you will answer, just to set the stage. Maybe we can start with who said last. So Chenai, you can start. Which is really to say, could you just reflect for us? We have heard from previous speakers, all of them. I won't go into the detail of what they were saying, but various reflections on the moment of disruption that we are seeing. But it's perhaps not just a moment. Disruption in the financing sector and arena has been happening for some time. So we perhaps have a heightened moment now. That's why we are all attentive to it in the way that we are. But how has this disruption really been impacting African development? I would like to hear your reflection on that, Chenai.
Hello, there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be able to, I think, be part of this really great panel. As was mentioned, my name is Chenai, and I work with an institution called Tax Justice Network Africa, which really preoccupies itself with the work of how to promote domestic resource mobilization on the continent. But not just how to do so, but essentially ensuring that it's done in a progressive manner, so that those who have the higher taxable capacity are the ones that are contributing most to the way in which we're generating this revenue, in order to make sure that we don't see the burden placed particularly on ordinary citizens or the most vulnerable in our societies. So in terms of the way the current context has been impacting our work and also the continent as a whole, one of the things I think you just alluded to now is that we find ourselves really at a heightened moment, but at a moment that had been heading in this direction for a while. So right now, when you think about the conversation around overseas development assistance, there has indeed been a significant cut. And we're seeing a significant cut, particularly from resources that were supporting, I think Didi had mentioned in her remarks, our health sector and other crucial sectors within our economies. And seeing that redirected, for example, to militarism, particularly within the global north. But if you take a look at the trend, this is really nothing new. In fact, we've been seeing a decline over the past 10 to 15 years with regards to overseas development assistance to global south countries, to developing countries. All we're seeing now is a shock that essentially is exacerbating what was already an existing feature. I think for us, it presents us with an opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, we focus on domestic resource mobilization because ideally we are of the view that resources that are generated domestically are really the most sustainable form of financing, and it's an opportunity for us to lean into that. One of the statistics that is not often known, but something that Ndidi also alluded to, is the fact that us as a continent are losing significantly much more resources than we've been receiving in terms of overseas development assistance. Ndidi mentioned that in terms of illicit financial flows as a continent, we're losing close to $90 billion. This is almost double the amount of money that we've been receiving in terms of overseas development assistance over the years. So really what those numbers indicate is that if we were to find a way to plug all of the different loopholes through which we're losing resources as a continent, quite frankly, we wouldn't actually even need to be dependent on overseas development assistance. We are already generating these financial resources within the continent. And so it's an opportunity for us to look at what are some of those gaps that already exist that are essentially resulting in us funneling resources out of the continent that will enable us to essentially be the ones that are investing into our own sectors and becoming those that are responsible for our own growth.
Thank you so much, Chenai. So I'll get this from you again. So thank you so much. So if Esme, you can come in maybe on the same question. I hope your mic is working. You could use this.
If I can borrow yours, thank you. So hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here on behalf of the OECD. So I work for the network of foundations working for development based at the OECD Development Center, which brings together OECD countries and non-OECD countries together on an equal footing basis. But maybe just to contextualize some of the other speakers' remarks, I'm going to draw on some of the most recent findings from the Development Cooperation Directorate, who monitors and evaluates official development assistance. So we know that in 2024, there was a 9% drop in ODA, and this is set to continue. So in 2025, the organization predicts that there'll be an additional drop of between 9 to 17%. So this is going to affect least developed countries hardest. They're expected to be hit by losses in ODA from between 13 to 25%, and some African countries face cuts of 16 to 28%. I think, as Ndidi mentioned earlier, health is of a particular concern. Currently, some countries in sub-Saharan Africa are set to lose up to 33% of ODA to the health sector, of which they're dependent on for up to a third. So we know that ODA is declining, and as other speakers have mentioned, there's a shift from development to defense spending, which shows no sign of abating, particularly when we think about NATO countries looking to achieve that 5% goal of GDP on defense spending. But again, as other speakers have mentioned, we see this as an opportunity. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And this is an opportunity to deliver on long-standing collective ambition to broaden the development tent, something that the OECD Development Center very much champions, not only to other countries, but to other actors such as philanthropy, and secondly, to recalibrate development efforts away from the current North-South paradigm. So at NetForward, the network of foundations working for development, we collect data on philanthropic flows and we map them one-to-one with ODA using the same purpose codes. So we know from preliminary analysis of our upcoming report, Private Philanthropy for Development, that philanthropy contributes $53 billion from 2020 to 2024. This is probably an underestimate, but it's based on the organizations that report their financial and organizational data to us. Of this, interestingly, we can see that Africa received up to 18 billion US dollars, so up to 35% of that total number. And again, this likely underestimates the true value because it doesn't cover all domestic philanthropic flows. But we can see that some of the largest recipients of this are Ethiopia, Kenya, and Nigeria. So while we're not expecting philanthropy to plug the gap, I think there's definite room for philanthropy to engage, using its strengths and leveraging its strengths for to engage in catalytic capital initiatives, as we saw in Seville. And that's something very much that we're championing at NetForward. We're encouraging philanthropy to engage in partnerships with other actors, whether it be public, private, development banks, and development agencies. So with that in mind, we have created the Scaling Circle alongside Suwiri's Foundation, one of the local partners today, and Agence Française de Développement. So we're really backing partnerships moving forward to bring together different organizations, to break down silos, and particularly to give domestic philanthropy a voice within this, as it's so rooted in local cultures and local expertise.
Thank you so much, Esme. And we'll come back, I think, to some of the initiatives that both of you mentioned. But for now, I think just starting with this overall picture, I think, Gibril, if you can also come in on that.
Yes. Can you hear me? From a purely financial flows point of view, my question is what disruption? Because there's none. From a purely financial flow point of view. If you take, there are 5 main sources of international flows to development in any country. And the characteristics of those have remained the same for a very long time. So if we take the supposed disruption on official development assistance, by nature it has been erratic. At the highest, it's what, about 75 million? 75 million, $1 billion, that is all of Africa. Second is foreign direct investment. Again, erratic. It can be as low as 3 years ago, 55 billion. Now it's jumped to 97 billion because of major investment in one country, Egypt. The biggest one for most countries, all countries in Africa, and for Africa in general, is trade income, what we earn from exports. And the value is 1.5 trillion. So think about ODA fluctuating from 40 to 80 billion. You have trade income 1.5 trillion, FDI similar to ODA, irregular. Foreign portfolio investment is minuscule. It's almost nothing. Sometimes it's as low as single digits in the billions. So the other one is remittances, which, again, numerically, it's not astronomically outside of the range. It's 100 billion. But there's a characteristic to it in that it is steady. Not only is it steady, it is counter-cyclical in nature. That is, when things are going well in Africa, it comes in. During that time, foreign direct investment also comes in. When things are going bad, foreign direct investment leaves and remittances come in. This was theorized for many years, and COVID, amongst other things, allowed us to observe it in real life. In fact, when COVID hit, the World Bank, UK government, Switzerland, and many other countries were so worried by the research saying that remittances will collapse by 20%, that a task group was formed as to how to mitigate this fall. At the end, it did not fall. In many countries, it actually, in Africa broadly, it fell by roughly about 1%, mainly relating to Nigeria, but mostly in almost every other African country, it went up. From the small country of the Gambia, where I'm from, which is the most remittance-dependent country in Africa, in fact, it went up by over 50%, because some of the money that was originally going through informal means came into the formal. So within that context, that ODA, which is supposedly the area of crisis, first numerically, it is small, very, very, very small. But why is it feel like it's a huge thing? Because what we've seen is what I call a spectacular bonfire on solidarity. Effectively, it's not a lot of money, but the people who've caught it have found where it would make the most pain, and they caught it there. That's why it sounds that big. And the thinking, again, I'm from the United Kingdom, that's where I live. We've absolutely slashed the aid budget. For what reason? To increase the defense budget. The defense for what? Our new enemy is Russia. And yet we are sitting in the United Kingdom on billions of dollars of Russian money, which is frozen. Why don't we use that money and fight our enemy rather than target the most vulnerable? In the small money we give them, we find where it's most painful and we cut it there. That is the only reason why it's so painful to us. It's not the numbers, it's where they're cutting it.
Thanks, Gibril. I also appreciate that you are disrupting the question itself about disruptions. So you are saying maybe let's actually be very precise here about what has been disrupted. And let's actually see the breakdown of what has been coming into the continent, how it comes in, and what is actually disrupted. So just taking it from there, I think all of you have spoken about these dimensions of sort of emerging models that are African-led that we are actually seeing. I think you have referenced them. But I think it would be good to just zero down in a very specific way on what you are seeing as African-led models that could replace, that perhaps are replacing in some cases, just from where you ended now, Gibril, what we are seeing as volatile external aid. So if you can start us on that, Chenai, and then I'll come to Gibril, just on that question. Let's just give Chenai your mic here.
Yeah, so I think one of the solutions or one of the processes that is underway to promote domestic resource mobilization that is Africa-led is a conversation that is being spearheaded by the Africa Group at the UN. And really what that process is supposed to do is currently contribute to the reform of the global financial architecture, beginning with the discussion on how to reform the global tax system. And what the Africa Group is calling for is a shift from where decisions are made with regards to the global tax system from the OECD to the United Nations, where each African country, well, rather every single country has a voice and a say with regards to the rules that will govern the global tax system. And the thinking behind that is because our current global financial architecture, and specifically our current global tax system, was developed at a time when many of our African countries weren't even in existence at the time. And so as you can imagine, there is a significant bias in the way those rules have been developed. And so right now there's a discussion about how can we have conversations about shifting taxing rights, because at present the rules currently benefit the countries where companies are headquartered rather than where companies are extracting resources from. So a conversation about fair allocation of taxing rights is one of the things that's currently at the table. There's also a discussion about now when you think about the digital economy, the current tax rules are framed in such a way that a country, not a country, but rather a company needs to have physical presence in a country in order for it to have taxing rights. But when you think about many of these current digital economy players, they are extracting resources or rather generating profits in countries where they have no physical presence, right? So what are the kind of rules that we need to put in place to ensure that, for example, even though Netflix might not have an office in country X, that country where there are customers that are contributing to its profit base can also benefit? So there is essentially an incredible charge that's being pioneered by the Africa Group to shift where those rules are made to the United Nations so that they can actually contribute to those discussions and address some of the biases that currently exist. As you can imagine, there's a lot of pushback that's at place because you're really pushing back against systems and structures that have been in place for many, many years. And you're dealing with money, right? But I think for me, it really shows one of the efforts that's underway, that's being championed and pushed by Africans, by the Global South, to really start to restructure and transform a system that's really set up to not work in our favor.
Thank you, Chenai. So same question, Gibril. Emerging African-led models.
Yes, so...
what's the typology?
Yes.
Show us.
The one I would talk about is Remit Aid, which is what we've launched during the United Nations 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville 2 weeks ago. And that is how to use effectively remittance match funding to unlock what we're calling remitter micro-contributions. Now, just a point about diaspora finance and where remittances and philanthropy sits. There are 4 main types of diaspora finance. The one that's best known and best studied is remittances. And we know formally the ones that are counted by the bean counters, confirmed, verified, coming to Africa is the 100 billion. Yes, but when I did a study on this 2019, I estimated the informal and in-kind one to be another 100 billion, so 200 billion. In-kind meaning somebody, my niece wants to set up a business, I'm supporting her, I give her cash 1,000, that's counted, and I buy her a laptop, and I give her a laptop. So you have that remittances. Then you have diaspora direct investment, people who send money or go there to set up a business which they have managerial influence in, directly involved. There's diaspora portfolio investment, where I buy treasury bonds or other corporate structures, regulated structures. Then there's diaspora philanthropy. That is, I support communities, people I don't know. Remittances, I support people I know, friends and family. Philanthropy, I support people I don't know. So what we're doing in remittances is sort of one possible solution in 3 parts. One, of that 100 billion that comes to Africa, at no point is a remitter invited to make a donation, a philanthropic contribution of $1 or 1 cent or 50 cents, politely or impolitely. Nobody ever asks. So that whole pool of micro contributions from remitters, the diaspora, is totally untapped. We want to unlock that. And we think in 10 years' time, that's $1 billion a year. possibly. So 1% of that. How do you unlock that? We're saying to donor countries and partner countries to make similar contribution of match funding up to $1 billion a year for 10 years. That would be used to unlock, to do all of the activities you need to then encourage the small micro contributions of $1 that you pool. So that's one part of it. But just two other elements to it. By the way, we have a brochure of it. It's out there. I think it's out in, or in the seats somewhere. That 80% of the funds that would be collected would be endowed into a remit aid and perpetual endowment fund that would be invested here in Africa. So it is working within the economy. And the income generated over years would be hundreds of millions, which then would be given to a trust. So you then have a new continent-wide trust fund that every year earns millions, if not hundreds of millions, to disburse it. And some of the ideas we have on how to do philanthropy, how to try different ways of giving, all of that we would have the chance to do it because we have a new continental fund. And the donors who are helping us with the match funding, they would exit. It's 10 years. After 10 years, they go. Because by that time, we would be raising $1 billion a year, and we would be earning from the capital. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gibril. And Esme, do you want to add on the same question?
Thank you. I think I'll approach it in a slightly different way, kind of going back to the data point. So just building on what I was saying before about partnerships. So we do actually have data on philanthropies engaging in partnerships with other actors. So Convergence's database on blended finance, for example, shows that 18% of all blended finance transactions since 2014 have had at least one foundation involved annually. But again, what's missing is domestic philanthropy. So we need more and better examples of how domestic philanthropy can contribute, initiatives that domestic philanthropy is piloting. We also need organizations to report data to work together with organizations like the OECD, because we want to ensure essentially that we don't end up in a situation where cross-border foundations or international donors where they are remaining engaged come up with parallel systems that don't take into account innovations that have already been championed by local actors. On remittances and domestic mobilization, this is also something that we're going to be looking at our own Net Forward Africa Philanthropy Day in November. So building on the discussions that we're having here, that's going to be a space to bring together cross-border foundations with domestic philanthropy, together with public policymakers, development agencies, development banks, again, to talk about these initiatives, to spotlight them, and actually to amplify those existing and ensure that they are sustainable financially long term.
Thank you, Esme. And so I think it's clear that there are things that are emerging, that are African-led. It's clear that there are also things that we need to do that include data and other dimensions that we are talking about. It's clear also that we are talking about complex engineering, actually, when you look at some of what you were positing here, Gibril, for instance, around what a trust fund might look like and so on. So I want to go just a little bit more into the question of remittances and other diaspora contributions. And this is specifically for you, Gibril. I know there is a lot there, but if you can just unpack for us a little bit more to get a clear sense of how these might be used. I mean, you have consulted for the African Union in terms of innovation, supporting these sorts of issues. How might these be used in a manner that actually might optimize towards sustainable development and financing and impact on the continent? So if you can speak to that briefly.
Thank you very much. There are very many other innovations around remittances. But today, of course, we're just speaking about the one on leveraging it, linking it to philanthropy. There are other innovations, for example, on using diaspora savings, the ones that are not coming, to attract them into investments in Africa. But if you take this remedy aid model, you imagine that this is now $1 billion that we are not collecting. And studies have shown, independent studies in Europe and America, shown that migrants who remit money are more likely than average to donate to other charities. So if you show them what their $1 contribution can do, the chances are they would contribute. So the endowment fund is a very important element because the challenges civil society, social enterprises always find is where do you find the capital and the fund? And there isn't enough money. So there is need for new philanthropic funds. And to put that in context, all of these targets we set ourselves, these billions, are too low. Because where we are financially, Africa, it's in a terrible place. The GDP of Africa is what? At the highest, 3.8 trillion. That is roughly the same as that of the United Kingdom. Sometimes when you tell this to students, they think you've made a mistake. The GDP of Germany is bigger than the GDP of all of Africa put together. That is including the big economies of South Africa, Egypt here, Nigeria, Kenya, Morocco. Put them all together. Germany is bigger. Come on. So the targets we're having through these remittance and the person funds of raising tens of billions, that should even be higher. But what we now then do with this match funding, you unlock the remitter contributions, you invest that in the emerging industry in Africa. And we have good studies, good case studies, good institutions in Africa. The banking institutions have been doing brilliantly in investing in different parts of the economy. Egypt here hosts Afrexim Bank, which have grown exponentially. And Afrexim Bank was caused, the creation of Afrexim Bank was caused by the African Union. So on this project, we went to the African Union, not because it is the institution for operational excellence. It is not. But it is the only continental body we have. And certain things we must not do as countries and just regions. We must do as a continent. And African Union and its predecessor have been successful in certain things, that in causing good things to be done. People forget it was the African Union that caused the creation of the African Development Bank and what it unlocked. And it was in 1992 they asked African Development Bank to create an import-export bank. And that was all they do. So what we've done with the Remit Aid is they've also endorsed the creation of this Pan-African platform to leverage remittances.
Thank you, Gibril. Just building then on some of what I'm hearing now, I think there is, not just from you as a panel, but from our earlier speakers who were setting the tone, there is a dimension that continues to come up about where Africa is in the context of the overall multilateral reform conversations that include the disruptions that we are concerned about or that you said we should not necessarily see as disruptions that are happening in terms of multilateral financing, but also other conversations on multilateral reform. So what is being lost, Chenai? This is the question I want to ask you specifically. What do you think is being lost? You know, it could be economically, socially, politically, or otherwise, when Africa continues to not really go in step with various possibilities of multilateral reform that include some of the issues that we saw in the Faal meeting in Spain, and the financing for development, that include broader questions around the architecture of tomorrow in terms of multilateralism, that include dimensions of the kinds of things that you three are talking about now. What do you think is lost, and what does it feel and look like? Can you characterize it for us?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a really important one. But I think before I speak, I just want to reiterate Prof's point about the fact that, the amounts of money that we're talking about are actually not that large. Just the other day, I was reading an article, for those of you that are following the Trump and Epstein saga. I think the amount of money that Trump apparently transferred to Epstein actually amounts to about $1 billion as an individual, right? And those are the amounts of money that we're talking about here today. It's also the same amount of money that was the first capital installment for the new development bank, right? And so I think it's so important to think about the fact that these figures that we're talking about, while substantive in terms of the impact that they could have, from a monetary value comparatively are not that significant, but could have such a significant impact on our continent. So now, with regards to the question I think that you've just asked about multilateralism and our role in it and the potential implications, I think there's a number of different ways that you could layer this question. First and foremost, I think the point I want to make is that although we are talking about the crisis of multilateralism, if you've been following some of the conversations, including that the one that took place just recently with regards to the Financing for Development Forum, it is actually the Global South collectively and the Africa Group that is pushing for a reform of multilateralism and pushing for a transformation that works for everybody. So whilst everybody is currently talking about the fact that it's no longer fit for purpose and we need to see a change, it's specifically the Global South, the African Group, that are working and proffering solutions that essentially work for everybody. And what's at stake if we don't see this kind of reform? Number one would be the continued exclusion of those that are most in need of the benefits of this reform from those conversations. I gave earlier an example of what's currently happening within the global tax system conversations. And essentially what's the discussion there is really about the fact that there are rules that are being made that have direct implications on ourselves and our countries where we don't actually have a say. And so the first point that's so necessary when thinking about multilateralism and the reform that's required is that we need to be at the table in a meaningful way. At present, where conversations happen at the OECD, African countries are present. However, the agenda has already been set. The decisions have also already been taken. And often what you then tend to see is that African countries are rubber stamping. And so politically, we need to see much more meaningful engagement with regards to the reform that we're trying to see when it comes to multilateralism. I think the extent to which we don't see that will result in a continued devastating of our economies, of our continent. I think, as was mentioned before, including by Prof here, when we talk about overseas development assistance, it's not been a significant amount that's been coming into the continent. It's actually been erratic over time. But the extent to which we ourselves don't start to see the resources that we have domestically that far outweigh and far outpass that, we'll continue to see devastating impacts in terms of the way in which we're not able to meet our developmental objectives with regards to the way in which we want to continue to grow as a continent. And then in terms of socially, the big question about the global financial architecture, whilst it might seem very ephemeral and out there, it's important to recognize that the people that are most affected by the discussions and the decisions that happen within these corridors are the women, I think, that we saw earlier being discussed about, the most vulnerable within our communities and within our countries. These are essentially those the people within our countries, the people within within our continent that are essentially the ones that are most in need of the reform that's required so that we can invest in areas that are essentially most beneficial for them. I think that the last thing I want to contribute to with regards to this question is that when we think about illicit financial flows and the resources that are leaving our continent, these are resources that are already being generated within our economies. So even without increasing our tax rates or even increasing our tax bases, we have the monies within our economies. And so the conversation that we also need to be having in terms of how to enhance domestic resource mobilization is how to retain that. And a big part of that question is how to address the current loopholes that exist within the global financial system. Because unless we address those, we will continue to see a leaking of those resources.
That's great. Thank you, Chenai. So I would like to ask my last question now. This one I will direct it to Esme and to Gibril. So you all mentioned variously the possibilities of unlocking potential within Africa. But also we know the importance of South-South cooperation beyond the continent. It's important, for instance, to be thinking, what's possible with Asia, what's possible with Latin America, and so on. And of course, even in terms of intra-African collaboration itself, it's also important for us to think what exactly does it feel and look like, or must it feel and look like, if we are to unlock the potential of domestic resource mobilization, of engaging with the resources that are available on the continent, as you were saying, Chenai now, in terms of what we are endowed with and the monies that are already here, that we need to circulate more intentionally within the continent. So could you just summarize for us what your sense is of how South-South cooperation, but also partnerships and intra-African collaboration can help really to unlock some of the possibilities of sustainable financing for the continent? Esme.
Thank you. I understand that the system and international organizations need to change, but I think, and adapt to the times. I think that the key added advantage that remains to this day is that they are excellent convening spaces that bring different actors together. So, for example, in our network, we have philanthropy represented from India, from Brazil, from different parts of Africa, including Egypt, where we're here today. And that's a really fantastic forum, I think, to actually come together and exchange ideas on what works, what doesn't, how to engage with public actors and public policy officials. Going back to our own Africa Day in November, the 26th of November, that takes place back-to-back with the OECD AUC International Economic Forum on Africa that's been taking place. It's now in its 24th year. So the conversations are really rooted in the conversations that are also happening in that space too. And this is a place, I mean, like today, we're developing this agenda with thought partners, really helping to shape the agenda and what we're going to talk about. And when it comes to domestic resource mobilization and remittances and the particular aspects of that we want to focus on, and again, linking it to public policy, so the OECD's Directorate on Tax, for example, what are OECD member states doing on tax? Where are the gaps? We actually look at if you look at ODA, coming back to ODA in the kind of small amount, I think it supports tax capacity building only 0.15%. So there's clear room for philanthropy to play a role there, especially in domestic contexts where it knows the actors, it knows what's necessary, and also to act as a bridge to those international dialogues where that's much needed. Just coming back to, again, on partnerships, so I mentioned the scaling circle. We're also in the process of creating a larger meta platform, 3D, so data, deals, dialogue. Part of that is really having regional dialogues as well, which I think is a great way of leveraging, as you say, conversations between Africa and Asia, for example. What works in these different contexts? Is there an opportunity to exchange ideas? Maybe just the last point again, I know I've mentioned this again several times, but the importance of data I think is really, really critical, because we need the data to shape these conversations. We need to know where the gaps are, what more needs to be done, and how to scale that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Esme. You had data and other two Ds, you said?
Deals and dialogue.
Data, deals, and dialogue. Thank you for that. And Gibril, the same question. South-South collaboration, partnerships, and intra-African collaboration.
Yes, so for the remit aid we're doing, the remittance might funding countries we're talking about, it's not just Europe and North America. It includes other so-called global South countries like the Gulf, which have many migrants working there. And we're having discussions almost off the record that are very encouraging. That's a very important one. On the broader issue of South-South, or in this case, even intra-Africa collaboration, my view is the accusation that I put across in multilateralism, I think it's also true in Africa. We are, broadly speaking, over-principled and underperforming. So we spend all of these times on this broad principle, whereas the action is where we're failing. Take, for example, from politically sensitive issues to a visa, to mobile phone tariffs, to airline tariffs. What better neighborliness cooperation and unlocking financial regeneration than neighboring countries and regions having the same tariff for their mobile phones? It's been done in East Africa. Has any mobile phone companies collapsed for lack of money? No. Because in the medium and long term, it is better for everything and the cake will be bigger. So then you have two countries, Gambia and Senegal, neighbors, the same people, Lesotho and South Africa, then talking about what policies they would develop to allow them to lift that tariff. For God's sake, we're not serious. You can wake up and do it. When it comes to the problems we've been having with the visas, again, if the goods are moving, people are not moving. What sort of cooperation are we talking about? Whereby it's easier, north-south, in terms of visa, to get your visa to enter my country than my neighbor. What sort of policy are we talking about? It's whether you do it or you don't. It's as simple as that, yeah? And the countries that have opened it, the peril we imagine that would befall them hasn't befallen the ones who have done it. For a longest time, 4 African countries had open visa policy, no visa for anybody who carries an African passport. All of them small countries. Gambia, Benin, Seychelles, Rwanda had joined. Have they been overwhelmed by irregular poor migrants coming to subvert the country? No. And it won't happen. So for these things, to me, I'm not saying I'm against big policy discussions and multilateralism. For God's sake, I've written some of these things. I've been involved. I've wasted my time being involved in them. Yeah? But what I'm saying, the things that can give us a result, there is enough policy. All it lacks with will. And some of the countries with this overblown love for sovereignty, in my view, that, oh, I'm restricting visa to this country because they are not reciprocal. You do, if it's a good thing, you do not need reciprocity. And Rwanda, that's what they did. When they agreed, they just did it without reciprocity. Thank you.
Thank you, Gibril. I think this has been great, really, listening to the three of you. Very educative as we go into the nuts and bolts of what might be, what could be unlocked, what are the current limitations in the system. In the 6 minutes that I have, I want to see if I can privilege 2 voices of any question that you might have for any of my 3 panelists. And then I'll give them the last word as we conclude. So I see Hakim here as a question. And if you want, you can use this mic so that we save time.
Yes, well, I thought it was going to be a but if you want me to take a cut. All right, okay, thank you. No, I think it was fascinating listening to these three great Africans, you know, and of course we make you an honorary African today. But I I have been in this business for a long time. You know, I was head of UNDP Africa, then the ECA and so on. And I can tell you how ineffective our dialogues have been. Our ability to make things happen, to move the dial. We've organized meetings in the arts, in the margins of UNGA. We have had special meetings. You just came from financing for development and so on. And we put things down on the table. It's not moving the dial 1 inch. I think we should get together and first start with things that we Africans can do and can influence. If we can do that, it's fantastic. When I was in ECA, I created the panel, Mbeki panel, on illicit flows. It was there, concrete, and you could see the tangibles that we get from there, and nothing happened. Nothing happened, particularly action in the part of the African governments. Really, nothing. And illicit flows have stayed at, just 1 minute, have stayed at the level of a study. And it is maybe, to my mind, it is the biggest source of domestic resource mobilization that we could get. It's in our hands. We can make it happen and so on. So I was just wondering what the panel thinks. How can we move the dial in most of these challenges that we have on the table? Finally, I want to correct Gibril that it was not the African Union that created the African Development Bank. It is the Economic Commission for Africa that did that I used to head. Thank you, yes.
Thank you, Abdullah. I also saw that there was a hand here.
Okay. Here. Two comments. Philanthropy, when you look at the philanthropy pie, everywhere in the world, deep pockets only contribute to 25 to 30%. The remaining are people like you and I, and maybe informal. Yet we insist on focusing on the 25% and ignoring the rest. Now, I understand the difficulties, but it just doesn't make sense. This is the first. Now, the second is a comment about the African Union. I mean, recently, Trump sort of forced a peace treaty between DRC and Rwanda. And you can actually smell cobalt in the thing. And wouldn't that be a role of African Union? So what are you talking about? I mean, for me, African Union is a failed entity, full stop. Like the Arab League, by the way, so they get offended. Thank you.
My name is Caroline Mwangi, also thankful to the panel for the conversation. So I agree with Chenai about looking at how we can plug into how we are losing money. And then I also agree with Prof. Ali in terms of, as an individual, you know, before we even look at the big organizations, how are we losing resources that we can actually give into society? I have a big challenge, and this is something I've seen where I'm from, where we buy very high-end phones and, you know, high-end laptops, yeah, and all these. Some of us have 2 gadgets and all. But I want us to rethink how we do things. If we're going to transform Africa, do you really need those 2 phones, yeah? Why don't we think of investment? We were told it's, I think, what was her name? Sorry, I forgot. The lady who did the presentation, she said, it's no longer about benevolence, it's about investment. So before we get into buying very high-end electronics, let's think, how can I invest this money? How can I take it into, I don't know, treasury bills or something? So I think we need to stop playing catch-up with lifestyle living and think long-term. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those questions/comments. They were incredibly helpful. So I'll give the last word to the panel. I'll confine you to just 1 minute, literally, each. And as we conclude, I think it is clear that we saw a range of issues in this panel, which was about, and I had intentionally not gone into the details, rather than go straight into the panel at the beginning to save on time. But as we have been seeing, flowing from the conversations we had in the morning, this panel enabled us to see what exactly is happening with disruptions in the multilateral financing sector. And we also, of course, had a question about whether there are disruptions or whether this is not what we should be focusing on, including even the percentages that we should focus on within the wall of financial flows on the continent. And I think we had how dimensions of data, dimensions of collaboration, of partnership, of engineering of particular products that are emerging, of multilateral collaboration and engagement within and beyond Africa are important for the future that we are looking for. One dimension that is extremely worrisome is to consider that it is not just quantity or the flows of financing that have been decreasing or that have been disrupted, if we accept the disruption thesis for a moment, but it is also the quality of aid itself that has been an issue. If you look, for instance, even beyond Africa, at conflict-affected states, fragile and conflict-affected states that are almost also at the same time the same kind of countries that are climate vulnerable. We found, for instance, as Oxfam, in 2023, if you look at the 2019 to 2020 data, you would see that per capita financing that goes to a conflict-affected state, for instance, would be at the level of $13.64, whereas to a non-conflict affected state, that is the same kind of vulnerability from a climate perspective, it would be $22.77, right? And if it was actually a country that was in real conflict at a material time, it would be $6.68. That's even further reduced. So the quality of financing that has been going into climate itself has been worrisome, for instance, from just that example. And we know how many countries within Africa are also conflict affected and fragile, if we accept that definition for a moment. So the quality of aid has been problematic. The quantity has been disrupted. We are hearing solutions that are African-led, models that are African-led. It is heartening to actually see that these things are possible and that we are framing them as we go. So I will start this side with Esme and then end with Chenai in terms of your last words, as you partially respond to what you heard and also conclude.
Thank you. So I think we debated how disruptive the current situation is in terms of the numbers, but I think going back to what I said at the beginning, this is an opportunity at the moment to do development differently, and I do think it is a unique opportunity. Although the Seville Compromise didn't go as far as actually calling on philanthropy, unfortunately, as a meaningful partner, we believe that it is. We know from the data it's funding at least 53 billion and it's innovating not just in Africa but globally. We've seen that in the COVID-19 pandemic, for example. I think the gentleman at the front there mentioned that we don't often see change from government, but we know that philanthropy has the capacity to be reactive, to act quickly, to take risks. And then just picking on the point of investment there, again, philanthropy can act as a first loss partner. It can engage in partnerships with government, the private sector, to make the money that we do have go further. I think also, again, just coming back to the data point, we need more and better data to actually map the whole picture better. And I think there's still a role for international organizations as conveners to play in this, to bring different actors, as I said at the beginning, around the table and to the table to see what works and where. Domestic philanthropy is a key part of that. And we're also creating the structures for meaningful partnerships, such as the Scaling Circle and the 3D. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esme. And Gibril?
I would say for me, the most important thing are these two words, implementation and now. Things have to be done. That's my view. Now, on remittances, of the 10 highest cost corridors remittances, 8 of them are in Africa. I won't name the countries here, but if they wanted to stop it, they can do it tomorrow. Yeah? And I asked them to do it tomorrow. Yeah. Last point on acting now, with the Remit Aid program we've done, the organization behind it, it's called AFFORD, African Foundation for Development, founded in 1994. I can see BC here. BC is a good friend of AFFORD. She was living in England at the time. And they do things. And right now, Remit Aid as a program, the first part has been set up. The escrow account being held by an international bank would be finished before we go to the General Assembly. So that match funders who want to support, they may say, I don't trust AFORD, I don't trust this new organization. It goes to that escrow account held by the bank. So it is now, it is open. We hope that by UNGA, it would be open, and we would be saying to organizations, it's open now. If you want to support, the endorsement in the form of a letter is very nice, but your 100 million would be most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think just a few points. The first on philanthropy. I think we need to see philanthropy beyond just the 25%. I think there's also a significant amount of political influence that I think we need to think about how to leverage when we're thinking about the reforms that we want to see on the continent. Because I think there's a lot of decisions that we've seen taken on the continent, right? Just because the right philanthropist met with the right person. So how can we also tap into that? And I think, secondly, my point around the different where we should be placing attention to. I have a good friend from the feminist movement who likes to say that, you know, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? And so I think whilst we absolutely need to be thinking about the domestic reforms and some of the even regional conversations we need to have that can really unleash a lot of the potential that we need to tackle, that we need to essentially look into. At the same time, we do need to be having these policy conversations. And the reason I say this is because the extent to which we address all of the national and regional issues that we've just discussed, we need to look into. Unless we also address some of the ecosystem conversations, it's really like pouring water into a sieve, right? Just the other day, I was reading an article that was based off of a publication that was shared at a conference in London. And what it said is that in 2022, Zambia lost $5 billion worth of tax abuse from a mining company. And this was at a time when some of you might recall, Zambia was actually in conversations about defaulting on its debt burden, right? $5 billion is money that, quite frankly, had Zambia been able to retain within its economy, wouldn't have had a need to have those discussions. But because we live within a society where we have these gaps, have these loopholes, it allows for those types of transfers to happen. So whilst, yes, we need to have conversations about the domestic and regional conversations, at the same time, we also need to ensure that we're leveraging the global conversations as well, because they're creating that environment.
Thank you so much, Chenai. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand of applause to our panel. Thank you, Chenai. Thank you, Gibril. And thank you, Esme. Thank you so much.